All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So we will start a fresh uh, chapter. Now, all along, we have been talking about, comparing economy using two frameworks. So far, we discussed that is the capitalist framework and the socialist framework. Okay.
Excuse me, sir. You were talking about some sort of graph. You said last class you will show so that we better understand the land revenue, like rent thing.
Or rent. Okay, just 1 second. I completely forgot. Um, okay, so we will take it up. Anyway, that part we will revisit again. I mean that labor part. When you look at the socialist economy, so there also we will come across a lot of this similar stuff, and so I will ensure that I'll try to get that out. It basically slipped from my mind. I mean, I couldn't. After that, I was busy with so many things. So yeah, that is the point. Let me just see. Uh, Environment. Yes. Mm. Just 1 second. Which is that? Okay. I think that I'll just try. Mm. Right now, I don't have, so I have to little. I will spend time to look at that. So anyway, so we will come back to that eventually. The Ricardian labor theory of value, when you talk about the socialist economies, and so next week I'll see. And now let us, try to come back to our discussion. So in the last couple of classes, we tried to cover two dimensions or two frameworks through which we could compare the performance of economies. That is the capitalist economy and the socialist economy. Now we know the what all about the capitalist economy. We discussed that in detail. Also, we talked about the limits to market efficiency, and so we covered that ground. And then in the previous class we talked about uh, the socialism, the theory behind it, and the ideations from where all of this came about. And there are multiple divisions of that uh, stream of thoughts, and all of that we covered. And then so as I said in our introductory classes, that it is not the only two framework that can be that are used, or that the people can use to compare economies, but there are also the other dimensions as well, where we'll be talking about culture, tradition, institutions, the institutional alternative as a framework to understand the performance economy, and all of that will also basically will cover from this. Now, just to remind you that the culture, tradition, the way people behave, the way people conduct themselves, the way people design their institutions, and all of that actually has root in their religious practices, in their traditional knowledge, and the, and all of that we will basically try to trust them. And the religious conduct and behavior of people also influences, in terms of their production, in terms of their consumption activities, and so that is how also they influence the economic, overall economic performance. So in this, we basically look at the major religions, including the Islamic economics, and also the economics of other religions, and then we try to see that how do they think about, in terms of organizing their economy and also in terms of organizing their society. That's what basically, everything comes back to that. So the religious tenets basically influences people's thought processes, and people's thought processes also, helps directly, indirectly, to shape their economic, structure, or sorry, the institutional structure. So institutions, as we said in the previous classes, that institutions are necessary to run the society, to run the economy, and institutions, without institutions, we cannot also have market economy, for example, you know, although it gives freedom to, individual consumer and producer to decide, to take decisions, but then the institution has to be there to guide, to see that everybody is following the, the rules and the regulations. Otherwise, the market economy also would not, function, or would not survive. And that is basically the whole point, and we will try to look at that from where that all of that actually span. Now, as I said, that the new traditional economy, what we call, this is traditional economy in the sense that it has the origins of the, centuries old practices that the economy and societies have, and that's how this has been going on, and this has been in fact embedded, and into the mainstream economic, structure that we will discuss. Now, the essence of traditional economies is that they are embedded within the larger social and cultural frameworks. That is what basically we are trying to unearth, dig it out, and then see the performance of the economy and the societies. So the social and cultural frameworks guide that to what extent a particular economy is into market economy or into socialist, frame of economy. Now, we, of course, in the initial discussions we had and in the introductory classes, that the market and command economies, in that we discussed that the production and distribution decisions are made largely on economic grounds, with sociocultural factors subordinated to the economic ones. And so in traditional economies, you know, people decide according to past practices that they have, you know, co-evolved slowly with the religious and family structure of their societies. So in traditional economies, basically the past cultural practices, social practices basically determines what goods to produce, when to produce, how to produce, and all of that basically becomes the mainstream thought processes. And so, as opposed to, the command and market economy, uh, you know the productions and distribution decisions are largely made on economic grounds. Okay. Now here again, the traditional economies are often characterized by, the familistic groupism that extends beyond family groups. Again, this was the original economic systems as the human species evolved, because we started off small groups of families living together, sharing, their goods and other necessary things, and so that expanded from one family to other family, and then it grows, and then now we have got the global village today. So it's like we all are connected to each other because of the technology that we have developed, and that integration has happened. So if you're talking about thousands of years of evolutions, that how people, from hunter gathering till today industrialized, even heavily industrialized, with sophisticated information technology, which has enabled us to communicate very freely, fast and quick communications, which has enabled us to transact goods and do things very fast, as compared to the ancient, the hunter and gatherer period and all, where people used to live in a very isolated, insular, and in small patches, and there was hardly any connections, and so on and so forth. Okay. So with this, understanding that the market, command economies, traditional economies, and all of that, you know, is the basically the evolutions that has taken place over the years, and now the old traditional economy, which is basically characterized by the primitive technologies, you know here we are talking about the old traditional economy comprises of this household economy, which is basically focuses on the family groups sharing among themselves. Okay. Then the other characteristic is reciprocal or reciprocity, so which basically exchanges relationship between groups take a ritualistic form of gift giving, that is reciprocal or reciprocated. Even today also in our rural settings we have this gift giving, if there is a marriage, if there is any other ritual or functions, so we carry gifts to other households, and whenever there is functions that we have, the other people comes with gifts. So the gift givings is a reciprocity, is basically very age old process. And then the redistributive characteristics, which is a big man or another central authority redistributes goods, a king or some central agencies basically redistribute the stuff. And so these are basically comprises of traditional economy, old traditional economy: households, reciprocal, redistributive. Okay. Now, the old traditional economies is basically a crucial part of the socio-cultural matrix within which economic decision making is embedded, and is the basically the traditional religion that dominates the society. So in the old traditional, economies, religion becomes very significant part of part and parcel of ordinary people. And so in that, you know in that, the people basically follow a certain ritualistic patterns of life, and strongly believe on something, and with that habits they conduct themselves on a daily basis. And so as opposed to the old traditional economies, the new traditional economy is basically, there is an effort to re-embed economic decisions making within such a religiously derived sociocultural matrix, but with modern technology instead. So you have this in all traditional economies, where the social matrix, cultural, sociocultural matrix, is the important part, within which all the economic decisions are embedded. So in that, traditional religions are basically dominating factor. Here is of course the same thing. The economic decision making are basically, are done within a religiously derived sociocultural matrix. But only difference is that in new traditional economy, the modern technology comes in a big way, like the one that we have. So every society now, whether it's Latin American countries or Asian countries or African countries, they may have some old traditional, economies, or the religiously derived sociocultural matrix, but they are adapting modern technology, whether it's a telecommunications or transportations or any other technology that the people are using to, uh, and that is basically the new traditional economy. Okay, so the why there is this appeal of the new traditional economy now. What exactly the new traditional economy does? The new traditional economy basically seeks to, to be the best of all possible worlds, combining old and new, individual with collective, ethical with practical. So there are, all kinds of things are there. They're trying to embed it, or they're trying to embed, or they're trying to combine the old practices with new practices, the individuals with collective, and ethical with practical. So that's again a whole mix of, the modern technology with changing behavioral patterns, and also the old practices. Now it is supposed to be the true third way between the capitalism and socialism, and that draws upon the, the virtue of each, while eliminating the sins of each. So that means the good of everything, that all the capitalism and socialism of goods they are bringing in, and eliminating all the, bad things or the sins of these, systems. And so that's what the, the new traditional economy is, supposed to. And so use of technology to spread the virtues of religion in search of socio-economic order. And so here, the typical questions, I mean the issues that is, talked about is the how modern technology is used to spread the virtues of religion in search of a socio-economic order, where socio-economic order in the sense that where, people are living happily without any discriminations or without any inequality, unemployment, uncertainty, without conflicts, war, etc. So that's what the socio-economic order. Now, how to bring about the socio-economic order? Basically, people are searching in terms of what are the good things about capitalism, what are the good things about socialism, bring them all together, and also use the modern technology. And also the socio-cultural, I mean the traditional economic practices, what societies are practicing, and all of them together, you basically come up with what, a kind of new systems, what is known as the new traditional economy. Okay, now all along we have been taught, or we have been told, that it's only capitalism and socialism, and there's nothing else in between. And so, but it is not true, because there are a lot of these Asian, African, and Latin American countries.
Uh,
They have been.
no. So can you give an example of like where the virtues of religion, like technology, is used to spread the virtues of religion?
What was your question?
So can you give an example like in where the use of technology to
Uh-huh.
spread the virtues of religion is
Yeah, yeah,
happening?
yeah. There are plenty of examples are there. So when we'll get into each of the countries, suppose when you go to Japan, we will see that how Japanese economies were actually embedded the good of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Shintoism, their own original religious practices. And that also Shintoism and also Confucianism and Buddhism, they embedded into their work, workforce, and also into the industries and many other segments of the society, which using the modern technology to to expedite the labor productivity, at the same time maintaining the ethical practices and also moral and highly ethical practices, and so on and so forth. So all of this we would see, and also in India, right? The Hinduism is one of the most ancient religious activities, and people are still trying to embed with modern technology. At the same time, they are holding on to their practices. Okay, Jainism, Buddhism. So all of that is classic examples that you will come across. Okay, and as we will proceed, and so now, where is the need of such things? That is the questions. And so how this the socio-economic order that we are trying to understand, how religious you know sentiments or religious practices play an important role in bringing about a social and economic order, which is supposed to produce best outcomes, which is supposed to make people organized, you know and and provide basic things to all the people. Mm. And that part we will basically discuss now. Now let's basically look at different economics or economic conducts of major world religions. That's when we will basically try to understand that, of course, very briefly, because each of these religious groups has very traditional, very large literature about conduct of people and how people should behave and conduct themselves, and what are the relations with market, etc. All of that are there, but I think we will try to look at briefly what exactly they mean. Okay, and then from there we will try to understand that how economy functions and how these kind of religious things basically play an important role. Okay. Is this clear to all of you? Before we get into the the religious thing, anybody has any questions? Hmm?
No, sir.
Oh, you don't have questions? Did you understand I mean, what exactly we are trying to get out of this?
Yes, sir. We're just trying to look at how religion sentiments affect the socio-economic order, right?
Yeah, because you see, anybody you pick up, anybody, how many of you are religious? I mean, whosoever you are here, I mean, can you raise your hands? How many of you feel that you are a religious person, or at least you feel some sort of religion, that you adhere to your whatever religion you are practicing? Hmm. Hmm. Only few. Six of you only feel religion, and rest of them you don't have any religious feelings, right? Hmm. Okay, 12. Okay. And others, you have no interest in religions and all. So I mean, or your parents are having some religions, no? You adhere to those religious practices also? Okay. Yeah. So, what we are basically trying to say is that, yes, 15 people are there around, feel that they are connected with some religious practices at the family level, or maybe they may be going to temple, mosque to pray, or they may be doing all kinds of pujas. Huh? How many of you are doing this Ganesh puja and Saraswati puja? Do you do that in your school or colleges or something? Hmm? No? Okay. So basically the whole point. So why do you do this? You know. So you may be okay. How many of you are basically? Uh, I mean, how many of you read some sort of religious text? Hmm? Okay, 5, 6. Mhm. You read some of the religious texts, whichever, I mean, religion, it doesn't matter whether it's a Confucian or it's a Buddhism or Christianity or whatever. So somehow you are reading, and rest of them you are not reading. Yeah, okay, 11 are reading. Then, so out of 44, rest of them you don't read any religious texts. Or how many of you have come across any religious texts in your lifetime? Hmm? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. 19, 20. Okay. So, so all that basically, points to the fact that that there is something that religious text that people study, people read, and people try to understand what all about life and what all about, you know, um, and how to run the life, and what is the these perennial questions, that what is the purpose of life, this and that, what happens after death, and all kinds of things. People may have questions in their mind, and they try to read and reflect, and then do all kinds of philosophical readings, etc. They do. And so the point is, uh, the point is that all of these basically, you know uh, we do it basically to make our mind clear, and also it has also impacts on our lives in terms of to have the morality, ethics, and all the other virtues that an individual should have, right? So all of these are supposed to lead to some kind of socio-economic order, right? Not to cheat, not to tell lies, and all of that, not to harm others, and all of that basically the things that people learn, you know, from this. Now, definitely, if people learn something and try to apply in their daily lives, should have some influence in their behavior, and that behavior basically reflects in their economic order. That is what basically economic conduct. So in this case, so we are taking these 6 major religions in the world, and we will try to look at that, the economic conduct of each of these religion, and then see to what extent they are conforming to either market economy or socialist economy or anything else. Okay, we'll try to investigate. Now let's first look at the Buddhist economics, right? Now, Buddhist economics, of course, the Buddhist religious texts have plenty of things, about life, etc. What's the meaning of life and all of that. If you want to read, you can always read Dhammapada, and other literature is available. Plenty of literature in YouTube and every other places you can read. But the major work that the economic thoughts of Buddhist literature was organized by E.F. Schumacher, and he wrote a book, Small is Beautiful. Okay, and so in that he basically extols the virtues of Buddhist economics. In that he was basically arguing that the goal of humanity should be spiritual liberations, and that Buddhist economics offers a means to this end. He basically invokes a vision of a balanced attitude toward work, directed at achieving a level of consumptions that is satisfying but not saturating. Now you have to understand the difference between this satisfying and saturating. Now, the satisfying is basically, that the consumption that is required to just to make you sustain, satisfy your physical requirements, needs, but not saturating. Means you keep on, consuming and consuming and consuming until you fall sick. That means you are saturated. Okay. So that's basically a difference between, the modern economics versus the Buddhist way of thinking, and as far as the level of consumption is concerned. So Schumacher basically exalts the harmony of humanity and nature. Okay. Now, the harmony of humanity and nature, in that he talked about the trees should be worshipped, non-renewable resources should not be wasted, and local production should be favored over long distance trade. That will basically reduce the wasteful transportation activities and to encourage self-sufficiency. Now, this is basically an interesting point in that, today's, if you look at our world, it's very highly integrated world. Trade is becoming daily activities. A lot of things are shipped across the, corner of the globe, and all countries are highly integrated. So that, according to Buddhist, is basically wastage of resources in transportation. And so rather, their basic argument is that every ecosystem has everything that the human being needs. And so every ecosystems, whatever they are, whether temperate or cold, or whichever society they are, and so if they try to look at what is there in their ecosystems, they will find everything that is required to sustain themselves. Okay, so that's basically their argument. Now, in Buddhist economics, where the Schumacher has basically, as I said, that in his book, "The Small is Beautiful," and he talked about in that right livelihood, which is one of the concepts of the noble eightfold path, and we will discuss that in a minute. And so the material wealth versus liberations. So here the question is that you know uh, the Buddhist economic way of life is all about freeing oneself from the acquisitive tendency, the tendency to just acquire material wealth, and being and then be unhappy at the end, and also suffers as a result of loss of those things. And so that these two things are basically, we will discuss that. And then consumption versus human well-being. So human well-being is certainly depend to some extent on the consumption level, basically, as long as that human beings requires food, shelter, and clothing, and a little bit of transportations and basic health facilities. That's all that one need, but not beyond that. So the consumptions basically, the goes when the consumption level goes beyond that, then that is when the human well-being is not, increased and enhanced, tremendously. So that is basically the point. Even today's literature also talking about that excess consumptions doesn't lead to, enhancement of human well-being proportionately. So that part also people are doing research, and we will explore that, which is also, the origin is actually in Buddhist literature, where they talk about consumption is basically to satisfy your requirements, not to saturate your body. Then production from local resources for local needs, which is what actually the main, thesis of the Buddhist literature, where ecosystem has everything, every ecosystems, whether it's a mountainous ecosystems or coastal ecosystems or, you know, uh, so all of these ecosystems has plenty of resources for human being to sustain and survive. They don't need to depend on other ecosystems to, to support and sustain. Then simplicity, non-violence is the basic human attitude, or the attitude of the Buddhists, or those who follow the Buddhists. Non-violence, not to kill animals, not to for food, for entertainment, not to kill, uh, human beings and other things. So no violence. Simplicity means it's basically purest way of living in terms of, having right thinking, not to be ambitious, not to be harmful, not to be, uh, greedy, and so all of that, anxious, anxieties, live on constant depression, anxiety, all of this not simplicity, they are all complexity. So the careful use of non-renewable resources, which is what actually they stress a lot, because they think that the non-renewable resources are, they cannot be renewed, and they cannot be simply just rampantly used and then exhausted. That is not advisable. Why the work is basically in terms of the Buddhist economics, where they basically stress on work to purify character, but not to multiply wants. Now, work is basically to look at your own behavior, how you behave in workplace, to what extent you feel jealous, or to what extent you feel anger, to what extent you feel, and anxious and frustrated, and all of that. You just purify yourself all the time, rectify yourself, not to just to, become greedy, acquisitive, and then keep on accumulating, multiple wants, or, from that. So that is basically, so, here the thing is. So we will try to explore that compared to modern economics, what actually the modern economics talk about, and what Buddhist economics actually talking about. Now, question is that, is there such a thing as Buddhist economics? Uh, Now, that, the in China and Japan, the religion has played a relatively passive role as a, dominant ideology. Buddhism has been confined to some South and Southeastern Asian countries. A lot of the countries have gone into the market economies. Nations where Buddhism has flourished are Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and so on. So also Buddhist socialism in Burma is one of the classic example, but of course that is also transforming quite rapidly because of the influence from China and other, market economies. Schumacher basically emphasizes detachment from materialism and de-emphasis on mindless economic growth. That's basically the point. And the Burma has had a, very low economic growth rate since its independence, but the Burmese leadership no longer view this as a good thing. Now, did you understand the something from the Buddhist literature? I mean, how they are conceptualizing it in terms of, you know, um, so in if you look at this, they work to purify character, not to multiply ones. For example, in modern economics, what do we do basically? In modern economics, labor is basically what? It's one of the inputs in the production process, isn't it? And so the producer basically try to reduce that input at whatever this they think it's a cost. And from the workers' point of view, if you look at that, we don't want to work, right? We want to, because we think that work is basically a kind of disutilities. To go to work means it's a disutilities. So therefore, we want to have a break and leisure. So therefore, we don't want to work long, hard, and because we value, leisure is a pleasurable things, etc., and all of that, we want to take pleasure. So that's why work is basically, in modern economic sense, work is a evil things, both from the producer point of view as well as from consumer's point of view, isn't it? But in Buddhist economy, it's not the case. Work is basically to go and give your best to try understand your own character. That's all. Now that is what basically the difference it makes from the more traditional way of thinking about work and the Buddhist way of thinking about work. And so, you know, again, if you look at the material wealth and the liberations, what they talk about is this, that it is not the Buddhists basically do not object to not to have material wealth. They basically say that you can have material wealth, but as long as you are not craving for that, the moment the craving comes, means that is to acquire more and more, be attached to that. That means that you are not liberated. That means you are attached, bonded. You have the bondage with things, and that becomes the cause of sorrow and sufferings. That's what the Buddhist literature is all about. Okay. Now, some of these things, but as opposed to what we are having today, because we want to work longer, because we see that the salary that we get is become part of the social status. We enjoy that, and also we want to accumulate more wealth, and so all of that, what we see in today's world. Okay, so that's the difference between the Buddhist economics and the modern economics, market economy. Okay. Is that clear to all of you? Are there any Buddhists here from this group? No one. Okay. Is that clear to some extent?
Sir, I heard of it's Buddhist economics means is it like a different form of conducting any economic structure or just following
Yes.
the Buddhist and then applying their own to the economics?
No, it's a different, because when Buddha was actually there during Buddha's time, and Buddha had actually eight noble eight noble truth path, eightfold path, isn't it? And one of the noble truths that he talked about was right livelihood. So that right livelihood, the way he described in his teachings, it basically influences people's entire behavior in terms of which one is the right livelihood, which one is wrong livelihood. It gives a choice. For example, you cannot have livelihood on the basis of cheat, like you're cheating and you're stealing and etc. It's not the right livelihood. Or you're having a livelihood that kills animals. That is not right livelihood. Or it's a livelihood that basically harms others, takes away others' life. For example, like if you are doing a tobacco business, or if you are engaged in a arms and ammunition which kills innocent people, then that's not right life. So there are a lot of these things are elaborated. Right livelihood, the livelihood that is enriching others' life, helping others to flourish, be happy, etc. Okay, so that itself is having a lot of things to to influence people's daily economic activities. So if you have this code of conduct, then obviously your entire society will be having different structure altogether. So during Buddha's time and subsequent to his time, there are societies which adopted this kind of lifestyle. Even today also, some of the remotest parts of for example, India or Tibet, where these Buddhist people community they are living in Ladakh or Tibet or Arunachal Pradesh and all. So they may be having similar kind of lifestyle conforming to this code of conduct. Okay, so what what we are trying to understand is that these are the code of conduct directly indirectly influence people's behavior. Even some of these people, Jain people for example, they they walk barefoot and they go for, they're highly religious people, and they don't take meat and anything else, and so they have this code of conduct which basically again influences their daily economic conduct, isn't it? So that is what basically shape the entire social structures, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that's basically the things. I think if it is clear, then we will move to the other one, Confucianism or Confucian economics. Okay. Now, this is actually arguably Confucianism shouldn't be included in these discussions because it's a philosophy. It's not, it's just a cultural influence that than a religion. So its current influence doesn't take the form of religious leaders advocating some fundamentalist adherence to the to holy scriptures or just the hierarchies. So Confucius was basically a scholar or an advisor of the 6th century BCE to political leaders, and he wrote his ideas in the analects with many basically discussions and additions by other Confucian scholars added into that. And so they have basically 5 central concepts. That is, one is the benevolence, second is righteousness, and third is propriety, wisdom, and faithfulness. So these are the 5 principles the Confucian literature talks about. Benevolence implies a hierarchy in which benevolent elites, which is the emperor in China and his scholarly Mandarin bureaucrats, rule those who in return are loyally obedient to those elites as long as they truly practice benevolence. So the benevolence is basically the ruler, okay, or the elites and the the subjects or the people who are loyal to those bureaucrats, and the the idea extends to the family where the son obeys the father and the wife obeys the husband. Thus there is strong emphasis upon order, hierarchy, education, benevolence, and all argued to be crucially elements of Confucian societies and their economies. Again, Confucian attitudes towards market forces have been basically mixed. They're not either in support or not totally against market system. Now let's look at the third one, that is the the Hindu economics. It's not a Hindu. I mean, the Hindu economics are largely derived from the Gandhian economics. Sometimes people interchangeably used the Gandhian economics are derived from a lot of these Hindu scriptures, and that's why it's called Hindu religion. And some of them basically Hindu economics, the people call it Gandhian economics, and all of that. So we will try to summarize that, what exactly they talk about. Okay. Now, Hinduism is the predominant religions of our country. So the world's second most populous country, and so central to the Hindu socio-economic worldview is the caste systems, the archetype of an old traditional economic system. And the caste system basically justified by the karmic doctrine of reincarnations persist in the what they call judgment systems of fairly self-sufficient groups of local villagers trading with each other through the well-defined divisions of labor provided by the hereditary caste system. So, of course, the original in the Sanatanic text, basically caste system is basically it's a division of labor depending upon the skill level that one has. Suppose if one is actually knows Brahma, for example, the god or the supreme or something, uh, higher things, and if somebody possesses that knowledge, so he becomes a Brahmin. Okay, not the Brahmin that the caste that we have today, in terms of the surname that we have just inherited, but the original connotation is this: that if you have the knowledge about infinite or about creations, about Brahma, then you are called a Brahmin. It can hold, anybody can hold that knowledge. Okay. Or if you're good at fighting, and have interest, and he will be given the assignment of protecting the country from external aggression. So he will become kshatriya, and then the other people, Vaishyas and other things, are depending on the traders, and then the Shudras and all of that. So they, depending upon the skill level, the division of labor was actually decided, but then that has become a kind of what, over the period of time it concretized. This judgment system is basically in a typical self-sufficient village in the olden days. Of course, these days it's all breaking up. In a village, you will find washerman, Brahmin, and barber, and all kinds of people for doing their own work. So they have the judgment system. So they go around and give their service and collect their rents, etc. The washerman, he goes around and washes the clothes, and he gets the revenues. The farmers who cultivates, and then he distributes the grains to the washerman. So these kind of what called the self-sufficient village, in a judgmanic system, they basically operate. Okay, so you could see that how the economic system is actually organized in a small self-sufficient communities or local villages, and they are trading with each other. Somebody is giving service, the barber is giving service, and the kshatris are giving service, and all kinds of services that people are offering to each other, and they're taking services from each other. And so in the past centuries, of course, various outside rulers such as the Muslim Mughals and the Christian British, they tried to penetrate and break this system. But it survived partly as a result of the Hindu village traditions of paying a share of its output to the current ruler without question. So that's how they try to survive for many centuries, and still continues in some of the villages, remote villages. The foundations of Hindu economics was first laid down by the father of Indian independence, that is Mahatma Gandhi. And so in his 1909 book called Hind Swaraj, and Swaraj means self-rule and self-sufficiencies. So both nationally as well as at the village level. So Swaraj is not only at the national level, but it is also at the village level. So Gandhiji was basically in support of having self-sufficient villages, where all this, cottage industry, he proposed to establish, and the khadi industry is basically, flourished in those kind of villages, etc. Now, Gandhi was essentially an old traditionalist in his economic views. He has very strong, principles which he, strongly advocated throughout his, um, tenure as a, as a leader of, independence. He basically strongly opposed modern industrializations. He opposed laying down railroads and urbanization, and that is basically then he idealized the homespun cloth and made the village spinning wheel the symbol of his movement, calling indigenous technology Swadeshi. And of course, his idea was basically not to depend on clothes made in London or in British, and because as we discussed that during this colonial times, a lot of these capitalist, advanced capitalist countries like France, Spain, and British, they basically colonized a lot of these African and Asian countries, made these countries as a captive market, and they used to sell their product. So Gandhi basically opposed that, saying that that people should actually wear clothes based on what they're spinning at their home. And so Gandhi also opposed excessive consumption, and he paralleling the views of the Buddhists as well, because the excessive consumption is basically saturating, and it doesn't actually enhance people's happiness in true sense. And so that is basically the thing that Gandhi advocated. Now, Gandhian Economics basically summarized in the book by Kumarappa. He published this book in 1951. So in that book, basically, if you look at, he basically tried to summarize all these Gandhian thoughts in a systematic way, and those thoughts can be summarized as follows. So Gandhian economy is basically based on truth, non-violence, and non-possession, which is basically conforming to the Buddhist way of life. And everything that we do should have, should be based on truth, and it shouldn't be on the basis of violence. So non-violence in the sense that hurting others, displacing others, and all kinds of things that that the modern societies have seen. Non-possession, not to possess goods, rather whatever you earn, keep something that you require, and the rest of them you distribute to the needy people, etc. And non-possessions. He rejects the concept of maximization of self-interest, and so that's basically the great departure from the modern economic thought. In modern economic thought, what we do, we basically everything is based on the self-interest, the motive, self-interest motive, the motive of maximizing your self-interest, and that's how the invisible hand theorem of Adam Smith, etc., is based on that. So Gandhi totally rejected that concept, and so he basically tried to distinguish between the parasitic economy and versus the service economy. The parasitic economy is basically the economy that you rely on somebody else effort, and service economy is that economy that basically shares things with everybody, so the stock market and all of that things that are going on is basically, according to his framework, is all coming under the parasitic economy. You simply just don't, if you have a capital, you just invest in different segments, and then you sit at home and this just take the interest or profits, whatever comes. And but that is not, you are basically living on others' effort. Somebody may be making, things, and their efforts are being like the when we discussed yesterday, what Karl Marx was saying, that the labors are basically they are creating the surplus, and that is not given to the labor class, that is being taken away by the bourgeois, okay, because they have the capital and all. So that is called parasitic economy. So he comes up with examples like tiger or monkeys and bees. So he basically says that the tiger, whenever he feel hungry, he goes and kill. Otherwise, he won't kill. If he is not hungry. Similarly, we have the bees and monkeys. They don't destroy their own habitat. Bees, for example, they collect the honey from different flowers, and then queen bees, they basically under her leadership, they all bring that and then share among themselves. That's called sharing economy. That's what basically Gandhiji was you know uh, most interested in, to have similar kind of systems. You can say that it's similar kind of communism that we discussed yesterday, or where Karl Marx was basically trying to you know suggest. Then primary needs versus luxury goods. Now this is very interesting question that basically Gandhiji has stressed quite a lot. That first we have to ensure that all our primary needs are met, sufficiently for all the people. Then the luxury things basically is basically comes at the expenses of our primary needs sometimes, which has to be avoided. So here basically again he comes up with examples. Now suppose you have a plot of land, and you have an option of cultivating either food grain or tobacco. Okay. Now food grain will not fetch you good money. Okay. And but tobacco uh, will give you good money, but the tobacco will kill or will take somebody's life, but food grain will give life to somebody. Okay, so these are some moral questions you ask, that what would motivate you to grow which crops. Okay, so which crop you would grow if you have a piece of land, and if you are faced with this kind of challenges, so what would you grow? Are you listening? Did you listen to my question?
Yeah, so
Yes, sir.
So tell me, what would you grow?
food grains, like,
Are you sure?
I mean, like,
Mm.
if we're considering what should be the right thing to do morally, it should be the food grains. But if you're
No,
looking at
but
making profits, then obviously tobacco.
yeah, but the question is that the tobacco will give you a lot of money. It will triple, it will give you 3-4 times more profit than growing crops. Crop prices are very little.
Again, so it
So, but
depends on the
Ah,
perspective,
Pri-
right?
yeah,
Like,
Priyanksha.
yeah.
but at the cost of many people's health and lives, right?
That is true, but then are the modern decisions are taking place on the basis of this moralistic attitude, moralistic view, that we don't want to grow tobacco because it takes away people's life. And similarly, there are several other decisions that the economic agent has to take. whether to what kind of things that they want to have. And so these are some of these questions that Gandhiji used to raise in his talks, and also he shaped some sort of economic agenda, saying that these are things that are valid and that has to be considered while taking decisions. Okay, so all of that, this basically in modern language, that's basically in the United Nations they're talking about solidarity economy, compassionate economy, and other things, looking at the growing inequality in the society, in the world. And so there is a need to have an economic system that is having solidarity principles, compassionate principles, etc. So all of that are also part of that. Okay, now let's look at what development has taken place after that, after Gandhiji is passed away. So in his 1965 book, what is called Integrated or Integral Humanism, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, basically he transformed this Gandhian inheritance into a new traditional view for the Hindu nationalist political movement. And Hindu, this Deen Dayal Upadhyay, that the founder member, I think, of Bharatiya Janata Party. And he was basically largely reiterates Gandhi's views, although with less emphasis on uplifting the untouchables and more emphasis on adapting to modern technology. So that was basically again, a new way of looking at it. The only difference is that Gandhiji basically was not in favor of introducing modern technology in terms of railroads and transportation, etc., urbanization. But Upadhyay was basically, having these core values, Hindu traditions, but with modern technology. So he advocated, Swadeshi, but interprets it in the, sense of appropriate technology as described by development economics. So that was basically the, modified versions of that. And so now these are all about Hindu economics. Okay. And so if you have any questions, you can ask, or we will go to the Judaic one. Okay. The Judaic economics is basically is called Torah in terms of this, which contains a long list of specific rules and injunctions regarding economic behavior. Okay. And so many are consistent with markets and private property. And however, many of these structures are irrelevant in the modern world, such as rules about the selling or treatment of slaves. And some have drawn the attentions of certain Orthodox Jews as perhaps being appropriate for Israeli society. And among these are the use of tithes for redistributing income and the prohibition of charging interest among Jews, although this rule is not applied to non-Jews. And so again, the concept of the Jubilee year is called the dramatic example of religious idea influencing current economic behavior, in that the prohibitions against working on Sabbath, a rule that has generated the most heated specific demands by fundamentalist groups in Israel, such as forbidding flights on the Sabbath by the national airlines like EIA. And so the generalized versions of the Sabbath argues for the following land every 7th year. Land should be given rest every 7th year. And so after 7 groups of 7 years, that means 49, will come as Jubilee years. So in Jubilee year, basically property would be remitted to its original owner. Okay. So recently acquired slaves will be freed, and the poor sojourners will be cared for, and so forth. So all of these basically in that 49th year they will be following. So the modern Israel basically emphasizes building a functioning economy within a hostile environment, and that's basically the point. And in that, some of these most distinctive institutions of the Israeli economy have not come from religious sources, notably the kibbutz, which was inspired by secular European utopian socialisms, although the most successful kibbutz today appear to be those that were founded by religiously oriented Orthodox Jews. So the Israeli economy exhibits fairly high level of state ownership, reflecting the socialist nature of the founding Labour Party. And despite more recently or recent movements towards privatizations and free markets, which have also undermined many of the kibbutz. Although the fundamentalist movements are very strong in Israel, economic proposals that are perceived to be counter to national survival are strongly resisted. Okay, now let's look at the Christians' economics. Of course, Christian economics is dominated by this Roman Catholic Church, which is an important figure in developing economic doctrines. And St. Thomas Aquinas was basically the 13th century's, Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. And so among Aristotle's ideas that he imported into Catholicism were the idea of the just price and an abhorrence of charging interests. And so these linkages between feudalism and Roman Catholicism led to a lack of enthusiasm for modern capitalism. So however, despite the presence of certain Marxist-oriented liberation theologies among Latin American Catholic clergy, the church has generally been, anti-socialist, especially under Pope John Paul II, Poland. He supports market capitalist economics more than any previous pope and is still critical of its excessive materialism and lack of compassion for the poor. So in Italy and Germany, the Catholic Church-based political parties have been the Christians Democrat. And so in contrast, the Christians Protestantism has been more closely linked to market capitalism, both socially and ideologically. And the Protestant ethic is the spirit of capitalism. So given the differing views among among both fundamentalists and mainstream Protestants, as well as Roman Catholics, the true nature of Christian economics remain unclear. So the Protestants and Catholic Church, they are basically again two groups, diagonally opposite groups of Christians groups, and they have bitter conflicts, of course. And also the Protestants are very limited one compared to Catholic, and but again apart from abhorrence of interest and just price, it's very less clear in terms of what is the Christians economic thoughts, and so that's not clear. Okay. Now, finally, we will look at the Islamic economics. Okay. Now, it's a very Islamic economics. A lot of the things that in Quran and other scriptures, you look at, everything is all about economics, because Muhammad himself was from a trading community. So obviously, a lot of teaching and script, I mean, the guidelines are actually based on that. Now, Islam, as you know, that was founded by the Prophet Muhammad from 570 to 632 CE. So he was a successful merchant in the western central Arabian city of Mecca, and the city contained a shrine known as the Kaaba, and that was the destinations of annual pilgrimages by many Arabian tribes. So there are basically two clans in that. One is that Hashemite, and the other one is that Quraysh group, which is the dominant one is the Quraysh one. So the Quraysh basically control the earnings from the shrine, and then Muhammad belonged to the Hashemite clan, and so from there basically from this background, the around 610, the Prophet Muhammad began to receive revelations from Allah through the angel Gabriel. Okay, so these revelations constitute the body of Quran. Now he also made many pronouncements separate from the Quran that are also collectively known as the Hadith. So these two sources are the foundations of the Islamic law code, and it's called Sharia. Okay. So a fundamental point is an absolute and uncompromising monotheism, in that there is no God but Allah, and who is all about powerful, utterly transcendent. The central concept of Islam is submission to the will of Allah, and the word Islam means exactly that. And now, so in 622, the Hijra basically occurred. Basically means these migrations of the Prophet Muhammad and his followers to Medina from Mecca. Medina is an agricultural city north of Mecca, to which he was invited by conflicting tribes desiring a mediator role. Therefore, the Prophet Muhammad became a political leader as well as a religious prophet. So the Quranic surahs of this time established rules for marriage, inheritance, and many other issues that arise in the functioning of a society. And so after the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632, the inner circle of his companions selected a successor to him known as a caliph, who would basically lead the Ummah but would not be a prophet. So then the struggles over the caliphate would eventually divide Islam. So in 644, the caliphs had successfully conquered Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and some portions of Central Asia. So over the next 75 years, North Africa and Spain would be conquered, and ending 100 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death, with a thrust into central France, which was again thwarted by those local guerrillas. So over this suddenly vast empire, the caliphs imposed a reasonably benevolent rule, leaving intact local political and social structures. The believers in monotheism, that is Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, were allowed to practice their religion as long as they paid a special tax. The fourth caliph was the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, that is Ali, whose caliphate was contested by Muawiyah of the Quraysh clan. So Ali's supporters came to be known as Shias, while the Muawiyah's supporters came to be known as Sunnis. Okay. And so in 680, the Muawiyah's son Yazid defeated and killed Ali's son Hussein and his Shia followers at the Battle of Karbala in Iraq. And which is basically they annually mourn this martyrdom of Hussein, and this formed the main split within Islam. So Yazid's victory signal the general dominance of Sunnis, who constitutes about 85% of the world Muslims, and Shias are dominant in Iran and in some pockets in India and other places. So they are majority, and a plurality respectively in Iraq and in Lebanon. But Sunnis have dominated both countries politically, socially, and economically. So small Shia sects dominated politically in Yemen and Syria, east of Iran, and Shias are basically frequently of the urban middle class, but generally they are a small minority. So, long story coming to the short, basically the rise and fall of Islamic civilizations. The apogee of these Islamic civilizations came during the Abbasid Caliphate, based in Baghdad after 750. So a high point was the rule of Harun, what is called Al-Rashid, from 786 to 809. So Baghdad was the world's largest city outside of China, and China was Baghdad's only rival in science and the arts at the time. So Muslim scholars studied the ancient Greek philosophers who were banned in Christian Europe and expanded upon their knowledge with such intellectual achievements as the development of algebra and Arabic numbers. And so, after the death of Harun al Rashid, the caliphate began a long decline, breaking up into many small successor states by the mid 900s. So, despite this fracturing, the period 900 to 1700 actually saw the greatest expansions of Islam in terms of converts. So, in some areas, local populations adapted the long established religion of the rulers, and as in the Middle East. And in other regions, conquest by Muslim successors states has forcibly converted the populace in Central and South Asia. Finally, in many areas, the conversion was led by merchants and missionaries, as in Sub-Saharan Africa, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So, after 1700, the global expansions of Islam slowed as it encountered the expanding power of industrializing Christian Europe. So that was basically the whole story about the emergence of Islam and its expansion and also its decline. Now, let us look at the economics part, the principle of Islamic economics. That is our main goal. And what are the fundamental concepts of Islamic economics? There are three ideas underpin the Islamic economic systems as a whole. First is Tawhid, or divine unity. That is the idea that all economic activity must be in accord with divine commands. Then Khilaf, or vicegerency, that idea that humans are the partners of Allah in managing the world and its resources. And the third is Adala, or justice, which implies concern for the welfare of others and cooperation as the basic principles of economic organization. Okay. Now, then there are other concepts like zakat or alms giving. So, in its original formulation, it is a 2.5% tax on most forms of wealth above a minimum necessity levels. Although higher rates, called the tithe, are due for agricultural produce, the tithe seems more like an income tax than a wealth tax. So hard work and fair dealing. So in that, basically Islamic economists believe that the sellers should use fair weights and measures. One should work hard at one's chosen profession, presuming it's an honorable one, and enjoy the fruits of one's labors. Rightly acquired wealth is approved in this system. However, one should be modest in the enjoyment of wealth. Furthermore, one should also pay one's workers just wage, and one should charge just price for one's output. So one should be efficient and not wasteful. That's why basically Allah doesn't love people who waste what they have. And so the proper consumption basically rules are there: pork, non-ritually slaughtered animals, and alcoholic beverages are not to be consumed. Prostitutions and gamblings are forbidden. Then there is the gharar, or the avoidance of chance. One is not to make contracts when the outcome cannot be predicted. Therefore, the speculations, forward market, lotteries are all forbidden. So debates surrounding insurance, sharecropping, land rent, all of that are basically in that category. So then kirat, or profit sharing. This is in fact, a deep issue for Islamic economics that remains unresolved. Is the line between disapproved of chance taking, that is gharar, or approved of risk sharing through profit sharing, known as kirat. So, a universally accepted one that has received much attention from current Islamic economies is called Mudarba. Now, this Mudarba, this is basically an Islamic form of venture capitalism, in that there is a financial backer, which might be an Islamic bank, and an entrepreneur manager. So the first provides an agreed upon sum of metallic money, or possibly good, to the entrepreneur, and then there is called riba, or the forbidden of interest. The core demand of Islamic economies is that the interest be totally forbidden. It is forbidden both on money loaned over time and also within barter transactions, where only goods are to be traded for each other at a supposedly equal rate. It can be argued that interest payments violate the fundamental Islamic requirements of brotherhood and justice, because often interest is oppressed and exploitations by the rich of the poor. That's the reason why they don't want interest rate. So the rich should take care of the needy, but interest income flows from the poor to the rich. And this tends to make the interest receiving rich idle and unproductive and parasite class. So these are basically some of these things that are from Christianity or Hindu economics, in Buddhist economics. It is basically that this whole concept of the parasitic economics is basically discussed. And the similar arguments played roles in discussions by Greek philosophers, like Aristotle talks about interest rate is not good. It can also be argued that the redistribution of income leads to economic stagnation. So in this scenario, consumption is reduced because of the lower wage, average propensity to consume of the rich, who invest the income in expanded productions, which leads to surplus as the market has diminished. Some of the typical problems that we come across here is the focusing on profit sharing rather than interest shifts the focus to the entrepreneur, and thus stimulates genuine economic growth while removing a source of cyclical fluctuations. So forbidding interest eliminates the what we call Hegelian monetary trade cycles of excessive investment in responses to interest rate chart changes, leads to again closer link between savings and investment, and it also reduces the it reduces the destabilizing speculations. And of course, that's one positive argument in favor. So in this view, forbidding interest reduces inflations because there will be less over expansions of credit and fewer people trying to live beyond their means. Again, cost pressures are reduced because producers can make profits at lower price levels, with the result that anticipated inflations will not affect investment. And so finally, it may be sufficient to forbid debt if there are sufficiently high costs associated with default and liquidation. And so the most serious criticism of these arguments that have the forbidding interest has been that the forbidding interest will lead to insufficient savings and hence insufficient real capital investment and economic growth. So some have in fact responded that zero interest rates mean that the future generations will not have their preferences discounted and that there will be a greater orientation to the future. So another problems with forbidding interest is how to allocate capital if there is no price for it. Some of these questions are quite valid, and so in terms of the Islamic banking, where they forbid interest rates, um, the practice of Islamic banking. So the question is that how do the bank functions without charging an interest rate? Now, if proper Islamic banks are not allowed to charge interest, how can they make money? Questions. The answer is basically to finance and support the various allowed kirat or profit sharing arrangements, such as Mudarba, which basically described in the previous slide. So such an approach effectively makes Islamic banks the equivalent of non-Islamic mutual funds. Someone depositing money in an Islamic bank de facto becomes part of the owner of the various enterprises to which the bank has lent money. This is as simple as it is. So in most Islamic banks, probably the most widely used such as arrangement is Mudarba and or Murabba, sorry. Now this involves the financier purchasing goods for the producers, then selling them to him at an agreed upon inflated price, which is to be paid back to the financier at an agreed upon later date. And this is viewed as a legitimate by the Islamic economists because the financier bears risk during the period in which he owns the goods. But this period can be reduced to an infinite time span, and also most practicing Islamic banks do keep such periods very short, thereby sharply reducing their own risk. So the Islamic banks increasingly want to do this as they face frustrations in getting their partners to report properly to them on net profits, and such arrangements can largely resolve these principal agent problems in terms of disclosing their profitability. So the final segment is that the first successful such institutions was a saving bank founded in 1963 in the Egyptian town of Midgarn, and so it was shut down by the government in 1968 during a socialist blink for but a full service bank was opened in 72 as the Nasser, what's called social bank, Nasser Social Bank. So in 1975, a full service Islamic bank was opened in Dubai. At the same time, the oldest son of them, then King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, Muhammad, founded the Islamic Development Bank, IDB, based in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And this has been a major spearhead of the international movement towards Islamic banking and has been involved in much international trade and developing lendings. And so the Islamic banks are now operating in over 60 countries, including the United States, Iran, Pakistan, Sudan, and which allow Islamic banks, although in the um, uh, first two of these countries, that is the United States, and Iran. So this is all about different religions and their economic principles. Okay, and so if you have any questions, you can ask, and or we will stop here, and then we will next class onwards we will discuss the country specific issues. So first we will do with capitalist country, and then we will slowly move into the socialist, and then the new traditional economies. Okay. If you have any questions, you ask, otherwise you can leave.